All right. Thank you so much for coming to this session. My name is Mike Jones. I am an economist, actually, from the University of Alaska, Anchorage, working in ICER, the Institute for Social and Economic Research. And I am really excited to talk with you today about supply chains in Alaska. They're very distinct, they're very complicated, they're very, very challenging to navigate, and they result in a lot of waste throughout our food system, frankly. And we're going to really hone in on a data story today. When you think about the state of Alaska, a map of the airports basically gives you a map of the communities in the state. We are an enormously aviation dependent state. If you actually look at what the Bureau of Transportation Statistics collects on terms of destinations for where airports are going, over 80% of all of the destinations are off of the road system. It composes about a quarter of our population in the state. That's really, really focusing, for example, on the west, northwest communities. It also breaks into very different types of supply chains. You end up getting much more aviation dependent out in these regions, whereas we get really, I don't want to say splinter, but distinct supply chains, for example, in the Southwest, where you have more year-round barge access. And the state tends to break itself up into whether or not you have year-round barge access or whether or not you have seasonal barges supplemented very heavily by aviation. And the food that we are eating is moving through those systems, or it's collected quite locally. And the data we have surrounding each of these different food types are kind of all over the place. There's things that are a total black box in terms of total amounts and how much people are actually consuming, people's dependencies. But we have wild food collection, home in community, cultivation. We have Alaskan farms and fisheries to retail, and then we have the big O outside. When I moved to Alaska, I was reading the ADN, and I'm going through the paper, and I saw the most curious thing was the word outside was capitalized with an O. Unironically, it was just casually thrown in. And you realize that you really are in an island type economy and an island type mindset up here. And when we're going to be focusing in this particular presentation, really just on retail supply chains. And when we think about how food gets to the state and gets distributed within the state, we have this statistic, and I threw this slide in pretty last minute because it keeps coming up. And so we have the statistic that 95% of the food we purchase in Alaska comes from somewhere besides Alaska. We also had in a presentation earlier yesterday, even from the federal delegation, saying that 95% of the food we eat comes from outside of Alaska. Those are two extraordinarily different statements. However, we actually have a report written 10 years ago that outlined the source of that quote. It was from a 1977 speech by a dean of agriculture director named James Drew at UAF. And I tried to recreate this statistic in the Food Strategy Task Force that the legislature had, and you just can't do it, really. The numbers, it's an apples to oranges, like not even trying to make a pun, like kind of pairing. When you have 95%, that's a ratio, and you have to have a numerator and a denominator, but also you need units. 95% of the value, 95% of the calories, 95% of the volume. And the reason it doesn't have units, frankly, is almost surely because it sounds like something that's just a really big number, right? It's like, I don't know, 95%, and it got written down and then it got picked up. There's a couple ways of kind of trying to massage an actual statistic out of there. It's not clean. I've tried it really hard, but it's suffice to say that we bring in a lot of the food from retail supply chains from outside of the state, a lot of it. And by the time it arrives, it takes about 5 to 7 days to get here. And so we have very pre-stressed food, frankly, particularly perishable food by the time it arrives. And when that retail food moves through the system, it not only has to get to Anchorage, that's just getting to Anchorage, then it gets transferred off in the port, moves to mainline carriers, and then has to move throughout the state. And these stores, local grocery retail stores, are a very important part of people's relationship to food in an economic sense. We don't have exact quantifications of this that I found in terms of purchased food by category, because again, it matters how much protein versus how much produce versus we're not necessarily making Quaker oatmeal, in each community. There's nothing wrong with eating Quaker oatmeal, but that will almost surely always come from outside of our communities. But there was an APIA survey that was run by Ruby Freed, which is a fairly distinct region. It's fair, where 4 out of the top 5 items where people said that they could improve access to food in their community had to do with more healthy foods at stores, more affordable store-bought foods, decreasing the cost of shipping, reliable transportation. It's not everywhere and every time, but it's a pretty ubiquitous conversation that I keep having with people from very, very different parts of the state. And so, for example, when there was a new AC store coming up in Anaktuvuk Pass, which is an extremely isolated community in the north, one of the headline actually read, "We're bringing more fresh produce through a supply chain that the AC stores have just as being a behemoth entity in a relative sense in the state. They have a much more developed supply chain." However, we know food costs a lot in rural Alaska. And actually within ICER, we've been scraping through web scraping, the prices of lots and lots and lots of types of food every month for about 1.5 years now. We're getting sort of towards a critical mass that we're going to be talking about in the next presentation on how we bring that out into the public space. But when we talk about how Alaskan food is expensive, Anchorage is more expensive than Portland, it's nothing compared to Anchorage, compared to outlying communities. And so we can track, for example, milk prices, a half gallon of milk being about $2.79 per half gallon about 1.5 years ago versus $6 outside in the Southwest and in northern communities. Even infant formula powder being about 50% more expensive, even though it's quite small, actually, and rice. And so when we're thinking about prices, the analysis we're doing in ICER that I don't have time to present today is we're thinking about weight, and we're also thinking about product types. And when you can send things through the bypass mail system, for example, and you can access those subsidized rates, you're shipping at about 48 cents per pound through that subsidized bypass mail system rate. However, most of our fresh produce is not shipped at all through bypass because it takes forever and there's very loose it just takes a very long time. There are strict rules, but it's hard to follow those rules. A lot of that is shipped through air freight. But even though it is done that way, we see significantly higher per pound price differentials through perishable foods. And one of the ways that accumulates as well is through spoilage. And so what we're trying to do in a broader research sense is figure out what is driving these different types of price differentials between products, and how does perishability of the product factor into what types of food are available and accessible to folks in retail stores, and also how is that costed in. And so there's lots of things that drive transport prices. We have fuel, we have labor, and really at some of the core of this too, we have really strong infrastructure problems. Who's been stuck? I mean, you had the privilege of being in a community in Alaska longer than you anticipated, or you were trying to get out of your own community to go somewhere. Okay, weather is real. And the infrastructure in our aviation system that facilitates planes moving in and out of communities is very instrument dependent. And so you have a visual flight rules flight, and then you have an instrument flight rules flight. When the cloud ceiling is very low, visibility is very poor, you have to be able to use certain types of instruments. What that actually means is there's a specific type of equipment that has to be working in your airport. One, you have to have one in the first place. Two, it has to be working. Turns out they don't work a lot in Alaska. And so we actually, working with the Department of Transportation and statewide aviation, they had a group that started pulling ad hoc data, and all these red dots here represent outages that were happening on a specific day. On any given day in 2023, about 1 in 3 aviation weather or automated weather observation stations, or AWOS or ASOS stations, were down in the state of Alaska in some way. That's crazy. That is crazy. That is not the situation in Minnesota. it takes forever to get out to fix them. And sometimes you can't send someone out to fix them because it's broken and you can't get to the community to fix it. There's a real cruel irony here. And so what we did is we got the data from the FAA on their outages. And so we've been able to map all the outages over space and time. And it paints a very intense, sometimes a little bit bleak picture, frankly. And so this is the northern, just the northern region for DOT. By descending some of full and reduced service outage times, they have differing severity of outages. You can perhaps find your own community, or I can talk with you later on it. I've worked with specific communities that said, hey, can you give me my community's data? And it's absolutely 100%. So if that is something that you would like, please let me know. I will absolutely get that done. The top 10% of these outages last over a month for full outages and over 2 months for reduced service outages. Like the station could be collecting data, but just can't broadcast it, so you can't use it. That's a real rough situation. There is a little bit of hope here. They're running around installing Starlink right now as satellite redundancy on stuff. And honestly, I'm pretty excited about that, frankly, because satellite-based redundancy could do a lot to remove some of these barriers. But these are drivers of flight delays. And so when you're sending food out to Togiak, for example, it's going first to Dillingham, and then you wait on that flight to go the next leg. And if that aviation weather station isn't working, your flight can't go, and therefore the food sits. What conditions are food sitting in? Well, there's just really not refrigerative cold storage in these hangars. And so food is just sitting at ambient temperature. Sometimes I heard an anecdote earlier that things can sit outside. Also, there's loading and unloading. It's pretty tough. And so as these outages prevent planes from flying, and we don't have adequate protection for the food itself in hangars, food that's destined for our spoke communities, particularly beyond the hubs, really see quite a bit of spoilage. And so what we were able to do is, can I get there yet? Okay, I won't go there yet. So you have this kind of lever between time that it takes to get to your location and the temperature conditions that things are kept in. If you're keeping something in your fridge for a week at a nice crisp 33 degrees, that can be okay, right? Sometimes you can still do just fine. If it's sitting for 3 days though at 60 degrees, you have the time. You have to have this balance between the two. And we already have research coming out of ANTHC, for example, that interviewing grocery store owners, and they're saying that profit losses are up to 50% due to food spoilage. Cost is assumed by the store and passed on to consumers. This capitalizes into the cost of food. So we have an inavailability, and then we have a higher cost. They said sometimes they're too rotten from traveling. You learn once it gets below a certain temperature outside, you learn not even trying to get items. Okay, and so that's the loss of the even attempt to bring something to market. I've been talking with quite a few grocery stores, and you get a lot of different types of data in Alaska. You get anecdotes, strong, consistent anecdotes, and that is data. That is qualitative data. You get pictures. Working with Cynthia Erickson out in Tanana on the Yukon, extremely outspoken store owner who sends me pictures every once in a while saying, hey, it happened again, it happened again, it happened again. She's getting stuff even directly out of Fairbanks, and it just doesn't make it. And it goes through the whole gamut of types of food products. And so in a broader sense that we're still sort of have ongoing work, we're trying to econometrically model or statistically model with food spoilage as the dependent variable, the outcome, all of the different drivers of that and the seasonal nature of those drivers. And so we're going to present some background data here that we've been able to gather. So does supply chain mode impact the availability of fresh produce and the intensity of spoilage in transit? Is there variation across seasons? And then, again, that ongoing work in the actual infrastructure. There's so many different parts of this. It's unbelievable. It's like been the weirdest onion to unpeel because it just, you pull one layer and there's 2 more layers under there you didn't even realize. So you talk to the grocery store owners, like AC Store is a big partner in the data part of this project. And they say, man, we just can't get the planes to fly. And you talk to the air carriers and they're like, we'd love to fly. We'd love to fly. We just can't. And then you talk to the DOT and they're like, well, we could get snow removed off of the runways, but we have labor shortages. And then it's talk to the but the weather stations are the real problem. And then you talk to the weather station folks, and they're working their tails off. There's not enough of them, and they just can't get out to these stations. Really, really pernicious stuff that really starts with actual infrastructure and moves all the way back to literally how long does it take to load like a large aircraft, and how long does stuff sit on a tarmac at 10 degrees, you know, on the unloading and loading of planes. I mean, there's so many different chinks in the story here. But what can we see? I've been working quite a bit with Kyle Hill at the AC store, who is involved in the Food Strategy Task Force and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And there's a reason he chose that committee, because I learned what an AWAS was from him. He said, AWAS outages are killing me. And I go, what does that even mean? I don't know, a what? Like, and so I did not learn what that was from the FAA, the DOT. I learned from a grocery retailer. So he gave me data pretty early on the actual spoilage by product type. And you can see that there's some clear seasonality here. They loot, or a couple of things. One, there's spoilage. This is called non-sellable on arrival, the sort of the lingo they use. It just means it's spoiled and they threw it away the second it got to the store. Basically flying trash, essentially. And so produce is the biggest source of this. They've lost over $1 million of product over the last series of years. I want to say like the last this is 4 years of data, I believe. And so it spikes in the winter and in the summer. But we were saying, okay, that's cool, but do you just send more in the summer? Do you send more in the winter, right? We have a numerator, but we need a denominator, and that takes a lot of trust. And that's a really great lesson for researchers, because the denominator is how much they actually sold. That's pretty sensitive information. And so after about 8 to 10 months of talking this through, building trust, Kyle actually took a risk, and I am sincerely appreciative for it. And we greatly respect the confidentiality of business data, but we were able to get the actual underlying sales data for all of their products to all their stores by store and month for about 6 years. And we can map that onto the actual spoilage, so we can understand the spoilage rates, not just the spoilage amounts. And the other thing that's really cool is, given how many AC stores there are, you get a lot of variation in geography, but also a lot of variation in supply chain characteristics. The AC stores, you'll forgive my like crude crayoning basically with this, but in the Aleutians in Southeast, they're barging up directly to the stores. They get about 1 or 2 barges a week, even to like Sam Point and King Cove. This stuff is not, produce is not generally going on a plane to go there. And in the Southeast, the barges just run straight up. They're getting direct flights out of Anchorage to go to Yakutat and Cordova as well. And so it's a significantly more direct route. And then you have sort of the traditional, this is the bypass zone. I mean, bypass, for example, it's not a program in Kodiak, it's not a program in Southeast, but this is the traditional bypass zone. The stars represent the hubs: Bethel, Kotzebue, Nome, Dillingham, and Ukyagbik. And even Fort Yukon, funny enough, counts as a hub, which is, no, there's downstream smaller villages, but it's quite a small place. So hub is a malleable word. It's more of, can you fly a jet in there? It has to do more with the aircraft that can land. But everything that's not a hub, something has to go through a hub to get there. There's a transfer. And so we're able to separate data into these geographic regions. And we're also able to separate data, and we're able to share and present data that are clustered. If like, you might have apples, they have like 53 SKUs for Apple, like SKUs for apples. Let's just collapse those to apples, whether Honeycrisp or Fuji or whatever, that doesn't matter. So we're not really able to talk about sales volumes like with the numbers, but we can talk about rates and sort of indices of goods. And so we have all of the sales data, we have it heavily disaggregated within the overall produce class. So we can see a couple things. What are they selling throughout the year in different types of places? And are they actually pulling back on even trying to sell certain goods, trying to test that ANTHC data? And so it turns out, move here a little bit, apples, it varies by product. That's the punchline. And so apples, for example, they're called a bypass fruit. And you'll find out later, they're called a bypass fruit for a reason, because they can take a punch. They really can. Apples are an extremely hardy product, especially in our environment. Basically, every single store in the every single AC store in every single month sold at least 1 apple. I don't know the condition of those apples. I have no way of seeing that in the data, right? But they sold apples. Now, bananas, pretty ubiquitous as well, but bananas are in high demand and they're sold in almost every store, almost every month. But where we see a little bit of a pullback, for example, is where we have non-hub air. That non-hub air is the spokes. Then we think about lettuce. Lettuce is sold everywhere, but then leafy greens and these packaged products, all of a sudden we have a pullback. In general, they're selling in less of the village stores, and this could be consumer preferences, but like this has been described to me as being mostly supply chain challenges. And you can also see this bend, this curve right here. And this curve is that seasonality of distinct challenges that I think that we can think about pretty carefully, because there are less villages that are getting things like leafy greens in the winter than in the summer. Then we have salad vegetables, carrots, cucumbers, things like that. We get a bit of a pullback, definitely less village stores are even being getting attempted to get a shipment. And then things like soft fruit, some things are just wildly variable, like plums and peaches and things like that. Those are highly seasonal anyways, but we see more seasonality in these types of stores. Now, just some specific data. We've got Bethel, for example, versus Hooper Bay. And I want to just show you the actual like raw data. And I actually just pulled this. Bristol Bay has been having a lot of food-related conversations in their board meetings in the last week. Pulled some custom data for them. If any of your communities in your regions would benefit from some very granular data like this or sort of more processed data, I'm allowed to share that. And I'd love to make sure this gets wherever it needs to go. So let's compare Bethel on the left to Hooper Bay on the right, though, a hub and then its dependent spoke. This axis goes from 0 to 5%. The Hooper Bay axis goes from 0 to 20%. This is apples. Apples are the easiest. They are the best. We're floating at about 0.5% spoilage in transit for apples. That's above industry standards, but that's pretty darn low compared to when you look over at Hooper Bay, where it's not uncommon at all. Each of these dots, each of the lines represents a year, each dot is a month. And so we see this mass where it's not uncommon at all to get between 5 and 10% of apples lost. When we flip it to lettuce, this goes from 0 to 25% and then 0 to 60%. We're losing just a ton of lettuce. In transit, it's not uncommon at all. Even in 2023, you get these punctuated events where you'll lose about 1/5 of your lettuce that you're sending, up to 1/5. And it's par for the course to lose, between 10 and 30% going out to Hooper Bay. And again, that's what was actually tried to get sent. And then that in turn gets capitalized into prices. Salad vegetables, huge differentiation here, 0 to 30%, 0 to 75%. It's really hard, and it's hard to even think about business viability for even when you carry a suite of products, like thinking sustainably about what you should attempt to bring and how you can remain profitable, among certain categories. Another lining of this story is frankly that shortening supply chains and our competitive advantage, frankly, for more local production can come in a couple different areas. One of which is even if you're growing in the Anchorage area, delivering it to the Anchorage airport and then flying things out, you have 5 to 7 less days of stress. And most of this lettuce and salad vegetable and cucumbers, they're pre-stressed throughout the journey, and they could be more hardy and have a much higher chance of actually feeding people in communities. But also from a business perspective, spoilage is just really cutting out bottom lines. And I think there might be a real business argument for bringing in more local produce, specifically through a spoilage reduction type lens and seeing how that plays out. When we think broader, those are just 2 store examples. And when we think a little broader and try to think about averages across all the types of groups, we start to see some really interesting comparisons. And the way you kind of think about this is these are the green right here, the highest spoilage. These are the spoke village stores. Blue is the hubs, and these other are either the direct flights from Anchorage out to Yakutat and Cordova or barge. And so in January, on average, about 3.5% of the apples sent to all village stores were thrown away immediately upon arrival. And we see some seasonality here that suggests this is worse in winter. When we move through the examples, we can see that, again, the real differentiation in terms of spoilage rates is really happening in the winter. There's a couple things happening in the winter. One, you have reduced flight hours that you can actually fly. A lot of visual flight rules require that you're operating in civil twilight hours. Famously in Alaska, it gets a little dark. It's a whole thing, right? And so it's also a lot colder. And so you have this decreased flight window that you can actually operate in. You really, really need infrastructure to be working. And so that bites, that's much more consequential. We have much more challenging cloud cover in a lot of areas in Q4. And we also have a huge spike in demand when the PFD happens. You have a lot of demand. Thanksgiving, Christmas, these are big surges. It's not like they can ramp up the number of planes they have and they're getting their flight hours reduced. I mean, it's a lot of things converging on the supply and demand side that are extremely unfavorable for moving produce. But it goes through potatoes, up to 15%. It's about 1 in 7 potatoes that are sent in the winter to village stores spoils before it gets there, about 4 times higher. It's between 2 and 4 times worse between the hubs and the spokes. It's consistent for citrus fruits. We're up about 1 in 12 in the winter. Berries, there's quite a bit. I know we collect a lot of berries. They sell a lot of berries in the AC store. Trust me. We don't grow every type. We do see one of the only real reactions in the summer. We're about 1 in 3 berries that are sent to their village stores, spoils on arrival. It's more like 1 in 10 in the hubs. Tomatoes, all of these are extremely challenging. Some of these have significantly higher growing potential in the Alaska environment than others. But again, this might be a vehicle. Salad, vegetable, it just keeps going. It's just crazy like how consistent it is over and over again. But we get to 1 in 3 in salad vegetables. That's just incredible. This is attached to nutrients. It turns out we have nutrients in our food. And what we've been able to do is map all of these products over to USDA's Food Data Central portal. They maintain a portal of all of the constituent nutrients and the edible percentages of all these goods and the USDA equivalent servings. So we were able to show, for example, from 2022, 360,000 USDA equivalent servings of fresh fruits and vegetables spoiled. And were thrown away immediately upon arrival to AC stores. That's just in the produce category alone. The vitamins we're mostly losing are vitamin C, E, B6, K, and A from our food produce categories. If we want to have initiatives like food as medicine, and we want to think, for example, like they're doing in Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, partnering the Bethel Community Services Foundation, doing prescription produce boxes. There are actual prescriptions for these foods. They're having extraordinary challenges getting them to survive the trip right now, and our team's working with them trying to map that. These underlying systemic infrastructure-based drivers matter. They matter. And it matters if you're growing food in Alaska because you're trying to service a market, a domestic market within Alaska as well. And so it matters from a grower perspective, but it certainly matters from a public health perspective. And we're going to do a bunch of fancy stuff, I swear. We're going to make it even more fun and complicated and probably a bunch of charts that people will glaze over a little bit. But we just got NOAA is partnering with us on this. It turns out if you want to know the ambient temperature in Kwethluk in February of 2022, that's hard to do. But we have professionals in NOAA who I hope keep their jobs for a very long time, frankly, because they did it. They pulled out. They have some advanced estimation techniques. Just this past week, they got me a monthly estimate of ambient temperatures in every single community that has a AWOS and ASOS, like weather station, like 150 communities. This background environmental data matters. It could matter for growers as well. If you are interested in your own, in ambient temperature data for your own sort of growing considerations, please let me know. I now have that, which is super cool. And I can connect you to the person who's much smarter than me that actually generates this. And with that, I'm going to actually hand it off to our next speaker, and then maybe we'll take questions at the end. Is that okay? Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Okay, we have a whole party planned for this next section. So I'm Robbie, I'm the director of the Food Policy Council, and we are going to share a little bit of information on a project that we're still developing. We thought we might be a little further along, but there's been some freeze and thaw, but we recently got the green light a couple weeks ago to move ahead on this project. So um, you know who we are, I hope. I'm gonna go a little bit quicker because we have a few more people, and we know you've seen this. But this project is a USDA funded one through their Regional Food Systems Partnership Grant. And this was a program that they first offered in 2020, and we jumped on it, and we're one of the first organizations to award this or to be awarded this grant. So basically what we did was hosted a series of community meetings in 13 regional nodes around the state. We didn't get everywhere. This grant required match funding, and we did what we could with it. So we did some asset mapping to look at what are the uh, assets that we have within our communities, what are some of the barriers, and what is Dream City for our communities. And out of that, with shout out Rachel Miller, we created this food security action plan. So we looked for um, things that came up over and over again across our different asset mapping workshops and created it's somewhat general of a plan. We didn't want to be too prescriptive, as we know, like Anchorage is very different than Yakutat or Homer. So we wanted to leave a lot of room for place-based interpretation. Ta-da. Thank you. So the goal of the action plan was to try and democratically address food systems challenges by inclusive participatory action. And I'm sorry, I'm reading the slide, but it said it best. So we had over 350 Alaskans participate, and then all these amazing partners and leaders helped us with bringing together those asset mapping workshops in each community. We held some network weaving workshops to how to build more inclusive participation in tables. We had our mapping workshops. We had a statewide questionnaire, and then we created the statewide action plan. And then our next step that we identified was to launch our Alaska Food Systems Network, which, yay, surprise, we did it. Thank you, Regional Food Business Center. And so that network, we have quarterly meetings where we have guest speakers talk about different topics, opportunities, and then our working groups meet monthly. So that brings us to part 2. Yay! Um, uh, we were just awarded a 3-year project, and there's two main pieces of this project. So one is to create a centralized repository of data and assets and mapping. So Mike's big brain and Hillary's big brains will be working on those things. And then to establish and facilitate a value chain coordination council. So Elliot's going to give us a little bit information on value chain, supply chain. We're working through that, but this project is intended to help the Safeways all the way down to the local farmers servicing their communities. And these are our main partners on the project, including, this doesn't include the folks we've invited to be on the council, but we're not there yet. So Mike, who you got a glimpse into his big crazy brain. Hillary will chat with us in a minute. The Alaska Division of Agriculture provided some matching funding on this, and then Elliot with kitchen sink strategies. I think I'm going to skip over these. Well, I kind of talked about the to create the value chain council. There's so many words in here. I'll have them in here for you guys to read later. So I'm going to pass it to my friend Elliot to talk about his favorite topic, value chain.
I won't know about that. I use obvious slides, but I'm gonna do yeah, okay. So for one, who's heard the term value chain before? Keep your hand up if you feel really confident you know what that means. Cool. It's like less than 1% of people here. Great. That's how I feel. And I've been doing this work for 15 years. So I'm gonna try to talk about, I guess, like what is informing this work without using the jargon, because actually this is extremely old work. And academia and policy and politicians are just getting hip to this, sounds like. Or the study of it has become really interesting in the last 20, 30 years. But this is just how communities fed themselves forever. And so I guess I'll just try to consolidate 40 years of theory into this one slide. There was a guy who first used the term value chain. What he was talking about when he did it was, for example, somebody who grew wheat. You knew that when you sold your wheat, that wheat became something else, became something we were calling value-added products. Somebody milled the wheat. They mixed it with yeast and water, and they made bread, and somebody put that bread in a sleeve and sold it. And at every step in the process, there was more value in the product that came from your wheat. He said, ooh, if you just own all those other pieces in the step, all those other steps in the process, you can make more money. You should do that. And a bunch of people more or less said, yeah, but I just want to grow wheat. I don't want to also be a miller. I don't want to also be a baker. I don't want to also be a bakery. So what if I just found the person who was going to mill my wheat and made strong relationships with them so I can focus on growing, they can focus on milling, and so on and so forth. And really in the early 2000s, I think the USDA got a little wiser to this and said, oh, well, there's alliances that are kind of naturally forming, businesses that had a particular approach to growing the wheat. They were organic. They wanted to preserve the fact that it was tribally made, whatever it is, just developed naturally. And value chain thinking, the notion of value chains shifted pretty dramatically from that initial instance in the 80s to what we're talking about now in this wonderful grant that AFBC has gotten. And it sort of stands as a contrast to the business as usual, what we'll try to distinguish from supply chain thinking. You know, roll with us, because these are all just jargony things. But it tends to be the case that when food is bought and sold in our economy, it's the selling and buying are motivated to prioritize profit and efficiency. Maybe not long-term stability of our communities or producers' existence. Value chains sort of say, ooh, if I'm an organic grower of wheat, I really need a miller who's going to preserve the organicness of my wheat, or else I just become another wheat grower. And suddenly nobody's going to buy my wheat because I'm competing with people who don't prioritize that value. That is basically the evolution of the idea of value chains in the last 40 years. Value chains need a lot of coordination. So value chain coordination is the basis for the council that AFPC will be launching. The reason they matter is because it preserves characteristics of the products and the producers or businesses that are involved in the process of growing and selling. And particularly, if you're trying to be different than a regular potato, because you're an Alaskan potato, that's a really important attribute to be carried through the process. And that means everybody engaging with it needs to understand what the difference is between an Alaskan potato and an Idaho potato. Not just the flavor and the chemicals or the whatever, but the value at a deeper level. Why does it matter? Value chains and the approach to developing them allows us to preserve all of that hard work, because it is a different product. This all sort of hit the national headlines. You remember back when everybody, this was like April or May 2020, we turned on the news and there was like, CNN was like, oh my God, there's like empty shelves at the grocery store. And Fox News was like, alert, alert, no more food in the grocery store. And they just said supply chain. They just threw out the term as if like that kind of described everything. COVID, I think, allowed people to see, when we relied on that barge from way over there, or even in the continent, lower 48, we're feeling like, damn, I didn't really know where my food was coming from before this. And now I actually I'm asking myself, where is that coming from? Because I just drove by farms to get to this grocery store. Why am I not seeing any food on those shelves? I think the pandemic woke a lot of people up, including folks in USDA, to the idea that, oh, there's resiliency that matters, that maybe we weren't building into our models, we weren't planning policy around the fact that supporting locally grown, traceable products is actually pretty good business in the long term. So shocks like this, like the pandemic, really woke folks up to it. I also kind of feel like that's what we're dealing with right now with the administration change, if I can speak freely. We don't really have the dependability that we felt like we had partnering with the USDA. It's kind of a liability right now. And so in the face of the shock that's given to the market, billions of dollars of promised funds being revoked, systemic programs to support farmers or food businesses being canceled or paused indefinitely, resiliency and adaptation is nothing new for you, because this is Alaska's specialty, I would say, or has been. And all of that just depends on trust and transparency that usually isn't part of the game in business as usual. And so this is not like you're either a supply chain or a value chain. There's a spectrum. Tends to be the case that supply chains function with arm's length transactions. I don't really care about your wheat because I can get my wheat from wherever. I'm a miller and I just need wheat. Value chains sound like it's actually really important for me to understand your struggles as a wheat grower, because I want to be in business next year. And that means if your business goes away, I can't buy your wheat. Ooh, I got to find a way to value that. Share the risk that you have because my business depends on it or my community depends on it. For those of you who have ever done procurement work or worked with big institutions, supply chains tend to deal with they sound like lowest bid by price purchases, where the institution has to spend the lowest possible amount of money. Value chains allowed institutions to measure other criteria that might be more expensive, not necessarily. But what's the best value for our community or our institution? But when I was listening to Mike, I was sort of like, oh man, all of this stuff is so fascinating and way over my head. I also don't buy or sell food. How do I play a part in this conversation? Importantly, value chain coordination takes a holistic sort of 50,000 foot view of what's going on and says, man, all of y'all are involved in this. Whether you are a home eater, whether you work at a nonprofit or a school, even if you're not directing airplanes or influencing public policy, there tend to be specific activities that facilitate this kind of stuff. Somebody's doing something on this board in a successful value chain. And it doesn't always include buying or selling. So the invitation, I know that we're going to explore this with this project, is how does your organization or you personally fit into the image that we're building here? Because you do. The question is finding your role and finding the way to coordinate with others, because that happens at all the levels, from a village to DC and beyond. Like we are interconnected, we interdepend on each other. And so whether you're a producer, a distributor, a nonprofit, or just an eater, you're part of the story. And so the next step for us is to take this, again, kind of like in the literature and the books, you'll see it as new, but this is old approach. This is old work to this, old approaches to this work. How do we apply it to 2025 food systems in Alaska is the next step. Leveraging the data that we have access to that we didn't before, understanding the power we do have with the funding we've got, is I think where we're headed. And yeah, I'll pass to you.
Thank you, Elliot. Thanks, everybody. There's a different slide deck, if we can bring that up while I get this out of my way. Different deck, yeah. So I'm honored to be part of this grant project with so many smart people, and we all have really unique like skill sets that we bring to the table. And like Robbie mentioned, we're just getting started. So I'm Hillary Palmer. I live in Wasilla, Alaska. I've been an Alaskan for 35 years now, and I do GIS. I make websites. I help with advocacy. I do lobbying, that sort of thing. So I look forward to working more on this project and taking all of the smart insights from the rest of the team members and turning those into advocacy tools that are super easy to understand, that our decision makers can interact with and engage with and hopefully make some better decisions. So caveat, I am not a farmer. I do not grow things. I struggle to cook. I burn water when I try. Thank goodness for my husband. Our children aren't starving to death. And I don't have enough land for livestock. But what I bring to the table here is 14 years of experience doing GIS, understanding complex systems, establishing a network of points of contact within those systems, and building the tools to help with advocacy. And just, GIS touches so many different aspects of life. Little tiny brag there. I just recently brought $1 billion to Alaska for broadband funding through the BEAD program. And how in the world did I do that? It was fighting bad maps with good maps, honestly. So who knew that that was a thing, right? But information is the new oil. So that's how we're securing funding. You all are my heroes. Everybody needs information, whether you're justifying the benefit cost analysis in a grant proposal, explaining the need for a legislative action to take place, or if you're trying to identify new opportunities for yourself and others, or new markets where you could break into. Anytime you ask a question that has the word where, that's something GIS can solve. So I look forward to learning more from you about what other problems can we help solve together. Information helps you troubleshoot issues so you can remedy those issues more quickly. And it's the easiest way to understand complex information is with a map or a visualization or an infographic or something you can interact with. So that's kind of my little piece that I bring to the table here. So what we're trying to do about, in support of this project is to build kind of that foundation of statewide GIS data that is publicly available, easily accessible, maintained, so that we can sort of elevate collectively the body of knowledge that any scientist, any grad student, any undergrad student, any nonprofit worker can kind of not have to start back at square one from scratch. We can start from somewhere together. We're going to make sure that the data is in interoperable formats for the widest type of uses. So it's hosted on ArcGIS Online. You can use it in Esri software, in free QGIS software. You can pull it into Google Earth, whatever you need to be able to do. And if neither of those are your jam, you can bring it into Excel and sort and filter and query. So that's kind of where we're headed. So here is the magical QR code for the new open data GIS portal for Alaska Food Policy Council. Still very much a work in progress, but great things are happening here and will continue to happen here. So far, we have some cool data sets to share with you on that site. The first one is farmers market locations. That has always been displayed in a graphic or housed in an Excel spreadsheet, and now it's a GIS data set. Also, major grocers, where are they in the state? So as you're talking about value chain or supply chain, you can finally have a data set to actually analyze how far away from this community is the nearest major grocer. Hope to also build out the independently owned grocers data set as well too. Some of that information is tricky to get unless you buy it, and then you can't share it if you buy it. So we're gonna have to get creative with building that out. And then we have two main applications on that website so far. The first one kind of plays to what Mike was talking about. It's a story map, which is just an interactive website that's kind of GIS based. And it talks about the challenges of transporting leafy green vegetables to remote communities in Western Alaska. We kind of just tried to story tell the way through the bypass mail process. Again, it's a draft, but I wanted to just share it publicly with you today so that you can kind of see where we're headed. We're going to be refining some of the interactive time slider tools so that we can share those with our delegation and maybe, other members at USPS if we need to advocate for keeping bypass mail as a program. That will be a resource that we can point people toward that, saves us the time from having to answer questions, but is helpful. And then the other one, it was funny, I think last week Robbie said, wouldn't it be cool if we had a dashboard of all the USDA funding that's ever come into Alaska? And I said, yeah, no problem. So I explained the need to my staff, and 3 hours later, there's a dashboard. So if you go to that website, there will be a bunch of, they're called cards, but it's like a little box that explains what the thing is. One of those cards is the USDA funding dashboard. And so from 2002 to 2025, you can filter by year, you can filter by recipient name, you can look at how much money this person was awarded to, what they got the money for, what program did it come from, if it sounds like something that you could apply for too. So hopefully that ends up being a valuable tool for you all. And this is kind of what the website looks like. I wasn't sure if I could do live demos, so here's screenshots. So these are the cards that I mentioned. So this is the leafy green story map that we're working on. And then there's the web map of farmers market locations, USDA grant awards, and then kind of an interactive slider of the distribution network. And this is kind of what the landing page looks like for the leafy green story map. And the user interaction on that story map is scroll. So you just scroll, read, scroll. But it kind of walks you through a path of logic to understand the problem and the recommended solution. And boy, they are a powerful tool to help people understand a complicated issue in 5 minutes or less. And our unstated goal for that was to really encourage the development of grant funding that could be used to fund hydroponic growing in the communities. Because like Mike showed you, the supply chain for getting those products to these communities is really complicated and full of critical points of failure. So best way to solve that is local. And this is just a look at one of the, as you're scrolling through that story map, one of the things that you arrive on is this time slider. So it shows you where they source leafy greens. It comes up to Port of Tacoma, gets put on a ship, Port of Alaska, driven to Anchorage International, flown out to hub communities, and then smaller plane to the consumers. So it's a pretty complicated supply chain that most folks in the lower 48 don't ever have to contend with or think about. And that's the hub and spoke kind of effect of the bypass mail. So, and this is just what that USDA grant program dashboard looks like. You can see all the years on this bar chart at the bottom and the total dollar amounts coming into Alaska. This panel right here is where you can click and select what year or what program or what recipient name, and then it changes the results. And then just real quick, in the upper right-hand corner of each of these other two panels, you'll see like a little circle with 4 arrows that expand outward. That's how you can make that full screen, and you can even export it to Excel if you're like, okay, thank you for the dashboard, but I really prefer Excel, do it. Yeah. Ooh, if I can find that in a spreadsheet, I can add it to the dashboard. I'd also love to make another tab down here that compares Alaska funding to funding that goes to other states, because I bet you we don't get our fair share. So like we said, we're just getting started. I love that idea. Another thing that we did is we have a cool application that looks at, we did some work for the Alaska Farmland Trust, and we looked at how farmland has changed in the last 10 years, specifically Matsu Borough. And so Farmland Trust didn't have a place to host that information. We really wanted to share it broadly. We don't need to hold on to this for any reason. So Robbie was gracious enough to allow us to host that data on her open data site. So you can go explore how farmland in the Mat-Su Borough has changed over the last 10 years. There's also, we provided a link to ADF&G's Community Subsistence Information System. And what else would you like to see? What other kinds of information would be helpful to you as you're thinking about growing or branching out or diversifying or starting something new or applying for grants? Please feel free to send us your suggestions, ideas, and wishes. And then in case it's also helpful to you, as part of another project, I wanted to make sure that folks are aware that there is a new DOT-sponsored critical infrastructure dashboard. And this is a website that makes GIS data available and accessible, even if you don't know how to do GIS, because very few people do. So it's just a ready to interact with dashboard. It's got some tabs across the top with data themes. But if you go to the all data tab, there's over 100 layers there. It's going to take a couple seconds to load for you. But that's where you can go and really turn anything on or off depending on what questions you're trying to answer. And that's the QR code for that critical infrastructure dashboard. And if you miss getting any of the QR codes, I also have them linked on the WOVA app or HOOVA app, however you say that. If you go to my profile, I just added them to the bottom as if they're my personal social media links. So feel free to check those out. Okay, and that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so like we said, we are just getting started. Hillary is a fast worker and was able to pull some of this together. But I do want to give Rasmussen Foundation a shout out for providing some pilot funding so we could do the leafy green study and to get some other things started. So like we said, we don't want to do research and work just to chase our own tails. We want it to be useful to y'all. And of course, the Division of Ag, who is providing some matching funding. But please reach out to us at AFPC or Mike or Hillary and let us know what is going to be useful for you guys. And this is a 3-year project, so we have less time than I wanted. But yeah. Is there any questions? This might be the nerdiest presentation you've gone to during this conference. Lorinda doesn't get to know. I'm just kidding. You're a food hero, so of course.
Do you can you access could we share our state databases with you? Like we have permitted food establishments, like all the markets, restaurants, seafood processors. Like I was wondering about that. Like maybe that would be interesting information to share GIS data.
Yeah, if that data already exists and is already maintained and updated by someone else, we wouldn't want to re-host it, but we'll link to it from this site just so that anybody who says, I want to make a map of, or I want to study Alaska's food systems, they can come here and get kind of links to everything else they'll need to know. So yeah, great ideas.
I'm looking at Lauren and his team over there and thinking about food systems and all the tangential impacts and thinking of maybe there's a public health overlay with some of these maps and maybe painting a bigger picture of how food is connected to health. So not to put you on the spot, Lauren, but your beard is calling me. Thanks, Lauren. I think we are, is there one more question?
If there's time.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
just wondered what other information might be included in this map that shows farmers markets and retailers. Is there
Yeah, what is the full breadth of data that is envisioned? I assume that there's more to build out on that page.
We're just getting started. What do you
Yeah.
want to see? What's going to be helpful
I mean,
for y'all?
I'm just thinking how useful it might be to see not just retailers, but then what retailers are SNAP participants.
Yeah.
Where are the farms in relation to the farmers markets, and where are the gaps? Can we overlay all of this information to see where the concentrations and gaps are? I'm sure there's lots of other things that other people will be able to think of. That'd be a very cool brainstorm session to have with all these brains.
Yeah, and all that SNAP registered retailers, markets, all of that, that's public information. And I know that our Farmers Market Association collects that data too. So that's, yeah, keep the ideas coming. And local food processing facilities, that's definitely on our list as well. No, yeah, just kidding.
No, thanks so much. I've had a couple people ask me, like, why are you so focused on AC? And the only reason, frankly, is that they are so dispersed, but also they keep really detailed data. And in terms of food prices, they have a web presence only because, not even so you can like figure out if you want to go shop in Bethel that day. It's because it's for bush orders, like further down the line. However, the AC stores, there's only like 33, 35 of them. That's a lot of stores. There's so many more like retail sources of food, but it's really, really hard to access that and get like reliable data in a cost-effective way. They used to have a survey coming out of UAF. It was a food cost survey, and they would have people literally just go. I employed in communities, and they would pay folks to go out and take like clipboard notes. It's just a really, really expensive way of collecting data. And I'm trying to think about ways to expand our food price data collection in a really cost-effective and hopefully automated way. Super open to suggestion. Like you said, we're building this, but to get a timeline, you want to start as quickly as possible to start gathering things. So if y'all know connect networks or you're connected to, for example, like Anika folks, I'd be really, really interested in talking with those types of groups. Thank you.
Okay, and I've been given the hook to finish, so we will probably, will probably be a topic of our food systems gathering in September, October, whenever we get rocking. Anyway, thanks for coming, and you guys can get in touch with us through the website, and I'll link you up with Mike and Hillary if you want. So thanks, guys.